everyone. This is Ashley Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary. And today I'm joined by herbalist and botanist Seven Song to talk about herbs for first aid. Now, Seven Song was my botany teacher when I went to herb school back in 2006, 2007, when I was at Tai Sophia, which is now called Maryland University of Integrative Health. Since that time, Seven Song and I, we've met at herbal conferences. We've had, abilities to teach at the same conferences. We've also shared students back and forth, mostly me sending them to him because his school's so awesome. But we've had a really nice relationship and friendship over these last years. And so it's a real joy to have you here, Seven Song.
Thank you, Ashley. I've always wondered how you pronounce your last two names.
There you go. Yeah, they're definitely not like common Smith type last names. So I want to tell folks a little bit about your background. So Seven Song is a clinical herbalist and teacher. He's the founder and the mastermind behind the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine, where he has been changing minds and lives for the last 13 years. And trust me, this is very true. He has been studying and teaching botany for over 25 years. And his ideal time off is to be in a new region, keying out and photographing the local plants, right? That's like his happy spot is in the woods.
And critters.
And critters, that's true. Yeah, you can check out his Instagram and Facebook pages. He's always posting interesting bugs, critters, and plants. Seven Song is also the founder and practicing herbalist at the Ithaca Free Clinic, working on a wide range of healthcare issues where all consultations and medicines are free. So very cool. So Seven Song, I want to talk a little bit about how you got into this work, both as an herbalist and specifically in first aid. So can you give us a little deep dive into your history?
Yeah, one part of that is easy. One is more complicated. So, I mean, I think, Ashley, like, why does one choose their occupation? Why does one become an herbalist, for instance? And I don't really know the answer to that. I can give like kind of what led me there. But so first, like I love categorizing, even as a very young kid, mostly with reptiles and amphibians, to study herpetology, just like what salamander is that, what frog is that, what kind of rock is that. I've never been very good at geology, really. But so categorizing and always liking to be out in the woods, liking to see living organisms. And that has been pretty profuse throughout my whole life. So there's always been a naturalist within me. I grew up in the suburbs of Long Island, and so I didn't have a lot of woods to go into. Like basically there are stretches, they're what are called highway barriers between houses and large highways. And they have some woods in there just so the houses don't get so much noise, I guess, or cars don't fly over the fence. I'm not sure why. But actually in the 1960s, early 70s, that's where I would go to look for plants and animals and just enjoy them. As I got older, so I am in my 60s, and the movement that was common when I was in my late teens was nuclear power and shutting nuclear power down. Actually, now I have a more nuanced view of it. But with that came a more social activist role for me. So in my late teens, I started thinking, in kind of immature ways, I think, but how to make a difference, how to be helpful, how to go on protests. I was part of a suicide prevention hotline in my late teens and early 20s. And so I guess these are the seeds of learning about social inequity for me. And so herbal medicine is kind of the combination of those two things, like wanting to be in nature, wanting to learn about plants and animals around me. I don't make medicines out of animals, but I do enjoy seeing them. And then also how to make changes. And so it just kind of, in a sense, gradually happened that I started thinking, one way that I can make a change is through the medical world. I'm a high school dropout. I have a GED. But going to college or university, becoming a medical professional, like a doctor or something, was never really in it. Also, just not really what I was very interested in. So I started, my first school was in 1981 at the Platonic Academy of Herbal Studies in Santa Cruz, California. Then from there to the California School of Herbal Studies in 1983. And so what started happening is just thinking, at first, like just a curiosity, and then I've stayed with it ever since. Like I became enamored with it. I really liked the plants part of it. I liked the ability to make my own medicines. I like the anatomy and physiology. And so that's how I started studying herbal medicine, kind of through that combination. As far as how I started learning first aid, that's very easy. So I used to go to, and still pre-pandemically, I went to a thing called the Rainbow Gathering. So the Rainbow Gathering, it was a very large, it's smaller now. I'm not sure what it is right now, but I started going in maybe my mid-20s, and just going to this large, free, off-the-grid gathering. When I first started going, to be up to 20,000 people. So I'm not advocating. The Rainbow Gathering has some good points, some not so great points. But after a couple of years of going there, I started working in first aid. I just started doing that. I started going there and just started helping out. So at the Rainbow Gathering, because we're an off-the-grid, large event, that when people get hurt, there's no ambulance. I mean, you can get to an ambulance, but you have to call an ambulance. Your car is likely 2 to 3 miles, maybe at least a mile away. If you're going to drive to a hospital, that could be an hour away. So in other words, we see people in pretty dire first aid circumstances, and it's always in a national forest, right? So there's just plenty of time for people to hurt themselves. And so I've been doing that. I've done that. I haven't gone the past 2 years, but I probably have gone to 30 practicing as a first aid herbalist. The last 5 or 6 have been really valuable for me. Sometimes we have a medical doctor, sometimes we don't. I much rather have a medical doctor. There's just lots of things I don't know how to diagnose or treat. And so over the last number of years, we've been working with a medical doctor, an emergency room doctor, and other people who are involved. But I've learned so much there. It's crazy. And so while there are other parts I don't care for quite as much, I really like helping people, and it's all free. And I have one more, then I'll stop jabbering for a bit. So I'm a skeptical person, maybe also cynical. I'm not sure that's necessary to say, but definitely skeptical. And if you want proof of medicine, first aid is where you find it, right? So if somebody comes in, has a blasting headache, and you give them herbs for it, and their headache gets better. They have really bad diarrhea. It's been going on for days, and you give them some herbs, it gets better quicker. Because like working with chronic healthcare, people with, like they say, fibromyalgia or Lyme disease or some kind of thyroid disorder, I feel like herbs are very helpful, but it's more difficult to tell because it takes a certain amount of time for the herbs to work. And often people are doing supplemental therapies, right? Whether it's medication, surgeries. And so first aid is really valuable to see, like, wow, that really did help stop bleeding pretty quickly.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember hearing your experiences, you sharing experiences of your work at the Rainbow Gatherings and Hurricane Katrina. You went down there, down south, and provided relief and support. So, gosh, yeah, you've seen a lot on the ground, and I love that point that if you want to see if something works, try an emergency situation or an acute situation. So all those experiences that you had, I mean, what were some of the common themes that you saw? Like, was there certain things that you would see time and time again at these different places where you would do your medical first aid?
So there's a disorder that I call SLOCS, SLOCS, and it's an acronym for sudden loss of common sense. So something slocky might be like somebody who never walks barefoot, walking barefoot at night in a new terrain, or trying things that they, like, I don't know, huffing goat piss, I don't know. So, and so there's a lot of these things. I mean, frankly, a lot of us do it when we're younger, do things that are experimental and learning our way in the world. So that's it. By far the most common thing we see at the Rainbow Gathering, not maybe at other events as well. Because I worked at the Envision herbalist tent. Envision was a Costa Rica festival, and they had a separate herbalist tent there with the medical people next door. The most common thing is foot injuries by far. People love to walk barefoot. I don't blame them, but walking barefoot in unfamiliar terrain is dangerous. And so And then what will happen is they'll get a couple of cuts on their feet and not care for them. And then they get staph infections. So I've treated hundreds of acute staph infections. I try not to. I mean, I go with my students and I let the students treat staph, which is interesting for the first 2 or 3 people, but then it's just routine what you do, and you have to keep it clean. So we see lots of staph infections, mostly on the feet. Sometimes drug-resistant strains like MRSA strains, but we actually never know if it's MRSA because we don't give medication very often. That's the only way to really determine which kind it is. But sometimes we'll have antibiotics and we use them. Let's see. So I made a list for a few of them. And just every event I went to, one of the most common things is people don't often think that it will be, but we all treat it on a regular basis, and that is anxiety, right? So all of a sudden you go someplace and there's hundreds or thousands of people around you, and anxiety for everybody who has anxiety, which is a large part of the population, anxiety blossoms. They might feel left out of things or might feel, there's just so many ways that anxiety shows itself. So actually, we have lots of herbs, everything from nervine herbs to, very gentle herbs to stronger herbs, all legal stuff, So, might have somebody hops or valerian or kava kava if they're having a very difficult time, or more like tulsi and rose. If they just want like something gentle. Sometimes, frankly, coming to the first aid station, this is a tricky one. So in the first aid station, we are there to care for people, but we are also the place where people come and vomit, right? Or have diarrhea, or they have a lot of pain. So you're very anxious and you're like, oh, I'll go to the first aid station. They might care for me. We will. But the movie around you might be pretty disturbing. Who knows who will come in next? So, I mean, sometimes it's very common there. And if it is, we'll sit the person down, have somebody talk to them and, and then give them herbs if that's what they want. So foot injuries, anxiety, and then just gastrointestinal distresses, every event you go to. I think partly it's a mixture of anxiety. It's a mixture of being in a new environment. It's a mixture of not having the foods that you're used to, right? So all of a sudden you're in an uncontrolled environment. And then sometimes bacteria or viruses get in there. So you get like Norwalk viruses, or you just get, who knows, E. coli or salmonella, or, whatever it is, Shigella. We once had a really bad Shigella outbreak. Those things, depending on severity, we get a lot of people coming in, and then we have a quarantine area. We just hear people taking care of business. So a lot of GI, but a lot of sometimes just stomach, just not used to your foods. But every once in a while, lots of events. All of a sudden, something will rip through because somebody didn't wash their hands enough and help prepare the food.
Well, that leads me to the next question about, it's kind of like that. If you were stranded on an island and you could only have 3 herbs, or if you were going to the rainbow gathering and you only could bring 3 herbs. I know this is a terrible, this is like kind of a torturous question because you would never do that as an herbalist. But let's just say you had to pick 3. What would be your top 3 herbs and why?
Well, if I was stranded on a deserted island, I would bring the most poisonous herb I know to kill myself if it got terrible. So that's like the herb that I would bring, right? I'd bring the thing that, because you don't know what disease you're going to get, right? Coconut drops on your head. I guess they always have like the one coconut tree in these pictures. So I'd bring something to off myself if things got terrible and I got diseased, and I don't know what would happen. I mean, I would just die. I don't have that kind of skill. So think about are what are the characteristics for an individual that they need, right? So in other words, it would be categorical rather than specific. So like, I don't know, it's a hard one because like you're just going to run out of echinacea, or I'm just going to get tired of listening to Radiohead or whatever music that I bring with me. I could tell you the herbs that we commonly use at the rainbow gathering. That's an easier way to go. Really, I really just don't know, because like in my mind, I'm thinking, well, what is your quantity of herb, right? Because some herbs, you can pack a lot in a small amount if you just bring in like a little Camelback with you, a tincture. Should I tell you some of the herbs that we use frequently at the gathering?
Yeah, let's go that direction.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not going to answer this. It's a hard one for me. So one of the main things we use is activated charcoal. So not necessarily an herb. Most activated charcoal I get is burnt bark from hardwood trees, so kind of an herb. But Because we use activated charcoal for GI upsets and for external wounds sometimes if they're infected. So we use a lot of adsorbents. We use a lot of activated charcoal. The most I use all year is there. We bring it in powdered form. We give it to a lot of people just because it pulls stuff. Activated charcoal doesn't kill anything, right? All it does is absorbs molecules of other preferential binding with bacteria, for instance. So as opposed to water, because you're putting it in what basically you're going to put it in water, you can stir it and drink it, but then it's going to release the water molecules and bind to other proteins. And we also use it in staph infections externally. So activated charcoal would be something that I can bring. I imagine on a deserted island, if I can make fire, I can make charcoal. So that would solve it. But charcoal and activated charcoal are very related, but they work very differently. You need so much more charcoal than activated charcoal. Once you activate it, which just means heating it at a much higher temperature, it's much more molecularly adhesive. We go through a lot of echinacea. Because we're just constantly trying to stimulate people's own immunity, and both, adaptive and innate immunity in these first aid situations. So actually, we use it externally for wounds pretty regularly, and we give it. So I bring big bottles of echinacea tincture. I use echinacea purpurea. It's just the least expensive, and people grow it. Which it's been like 20 years since anybody should have gathered any echinacea plants in the wild at this point. Maybe 35 years, I'm not sure. I always carry a berberine containing herb. These days, my preference is Japanese barberry because it's a non-native where I live, so Berberis thunbergii. The close similar one would be Oregon grapefruit. Then there are places where there's lots of Oregon grapefruit, but around here, Japanese barberry is an invasive plant. If you go into the Catskills south of here, I have friends that their yard is just Japanese barberry. So it's just, as far as ethics of gathering wild plants, it is no problem at all. People don't really want it there. It's just hard to get out of the ground, really hard. So we pretty much always have one. And that's because of the antibacterial and antiviral properties of berberine containing herbs. I pretty much never use golden seal anymore. Every once in a while, somebody will send me some, or I'll have some and I'll use it. And I do think golden seal has maybe specific properties that the other ones don't, but I think another herb, it's the end of the era of using it. And even when I have friends that grow it, sometimes they get poached, right? People just go and gather it, that and ginseng. And so I just avoid using golden seal at this point. What else did I put down in here? We use a lot of arnica liniment and some arnica oil, but mostly arnica liniment, something you see at every event. Are sprains and strains, soft tissue injuries from people running around, people having fun, people lifting heavy things, and just just twisting their ankles, twisting their wrists, and so I like arnica liniment for that. So we use a lot of that.
So
we have
the liniment. Yeah. Do you use? Because a liniment, for those people that don't know, it's the herb in alcohol, like rubbing alcohol. It's not for ingesting. It's for use only topically. How do you make that arnica yourself? Like, do you get like flowers? How do you make that? I gather.
So everyone, some years the rainbow gathering is in the Rockies. This year it's in Colorado, and so I bring my class to the rainbow gathering, work in first aid, and then we'll go and gather arnica, because that's the time of year where you can find it. Hopefully, I don't really know where we're going to be in the Rockies, but one of the plants we'll look for will be arnica and a couple of others. And arnica in some places, like especially arnica cordifolia and arnica lapifolia, both can grow in abundance. And you're only taking the flowers, so it seems pretty reasonable to gather. Yeah, then I stick in isopropyl alcohol. In general, I find liniments more effective than oils. Oils feel nice, and they're much better if you want to do something like massage. But the liniments just penetrate deeper. And so the deeper the injury is, the better the liniments will just carry the constituents of the plants in. We use isopropyl alcohol and not rubbing alcohol so much, though you can use rubbing alcohol, which is just watered down isopropyl alcohol.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Was there another herb that you were going to mention?
There's lots. I just wrote a few. We always bring lots and lots of willow, or we gather lots of willow if there's plenty there, or we gather poplar. You need an anti-inflammatory. Wherever people are going to injure themselves, anti-inflammatories are a mainstay. Anytime you have soft tissue injuries, actually lots of bacterial infections, a lot of things, giving anti-inflammatories will reduce the tension or the swelling in the body. And so willow is one of the common ones I bring. But again, willow can be common. And here's what being, by the way, thank you. I never get introduced as a botanist. And of course, botany, I mean, I guess I taught botany for Thai Sophia, but as a botanist, I have to be careful, right? Because I can go to an area and there could be willow growing, but it could be an uncommon species, right? So I don't want to, because often we gather plants where we are, if possible, so we're not transporting as much. But not, so I'll bring a floral key and then I'll key out the willows to make sure that what I'm gathering is plentiful in the region. But yeah, lots of anti-inflammatories and then just pain relievers because people hurt themselves and they're in pain. And so, it varies. We use a lot of valerian. I use a lot of hops. I use some kava kava. And then some of the more mild ones, also a lot of Jamaican dogwood, which is a nice pain reliever because it doesn't have sedative qualities. Also, they're helpful because, as I said, anxiety is common. But the other thing that's common is people can't sleep, right? They're all wound up and it's just noisy, right? These events, especially in Vision, that was crazy. Like because at like this, dance trance music festival or whatever, it's just very electronic and it's really loud. And the later it gets, the louder it gets because people love dance. I mean, that's what people are there for, So, but not me. So, so a lot of other people, though, just can't sleep. So, but you can also use hops and valerian, of course, for that. So you have pain relief on one end and sleep on another. Those are some of them. I mean, I bring about maybe 75 different plants when 75. I work, something like that. I actually, if people are interested, if you go to my website, there's a checklist on the website. If you go to the website, sevensong.com, and go to resources and handouts, and then go down the handouts, it'll say generic checklist. So not everything in that generic checklist I bring, but that is my checklist for them. So I'll write how many ounces of each one I have in there. But I also have lots of first aid handouts. They're all free.
Yeah. And actually in our school, I've referred people and shared some of your handouts. They have your name on them so people know that it's your stuff, but I share them. I'm like, this is an amazing resource because if you're going camping, if you're traveling, here's a list of things that you are likely going to want to bring for first aid to have with you. And that's just it's such a nice resource. So thank you for providing those for free.
Of course.
Now I have an herbalist question. Energetics. What do you do? I mean, when it's a first aid situation, are you looking at hot, cold, damp, or dry? Or are you just really going with like, I need to get rid of this bacteria, or I just need to calm this person who's having a panic attack down? Like, how does that work?
At the risk of losing your whole audience here, I don't use energetics at all. They're not a part of my mind frame. I don't really think, I think cayenne is hot. Maybe mustard plasters are hot. But I don't really think, I might think like a slippery elm is demulcent. So moist fits perfectly in that. But really, I never really think in it, whether it's chronic health care or first aid. I think on a pathophysiological and individualistic basis. So, what is this? Like, is this a sprained ankle? What tendons might be torn in here? I mean, often I don't really care what tendons are torn in there, but like tendons might be torn in here. So we have connective tissue damage. And then though, because pathophysiology could be a bit reductionistic, you have to think, okay, we have an individual here and what's good for them? Like what other parts of their health might be suffering due to whatever else is happening. So Lyme disease might be affecting their mind and their knees and their sleep and their mental health status. So I'm not going to just try to kill the Lyme. I will try to kill the Lyme. It's really hard to do though, to kill Borrelia bacteria. But in first aid, no, it's more about taking the individual into account and then kind of a just a damage control, damage assessment, I guess.
Yeah. And what about your intuition? Like, do you ever get like a hit like this? I mean, whether it's, we could say intuitive or just based on your 25 plus years of experience. I mean, is it ever just like, okay, this is the herb I have to use for this person? And I'm thinking maybe more for subtle things like anxiety and panic attacks. All
the time. Yeah. I think, in fact, like, for instance, like what's the difference between blue vervain and passion flower? I mean, to me, when people will make big different changes, including myself, will write about them and kind of distinct them. But really, when I think about it, they seem very, very similar in their approach. So why choose one of the or the other? But no, I think intuition based on experience is, and then in the beginning, intuition just based on intuition, and then you have to study, right? Especially if it's dangerous. Like if you're giving somebody something for mild anxiety, you have lots and lots of avenue for it to go wrong, frankly. But somebody who has, anxiety that's really, really destroying their quality of life, your remedy becomes more important. So, I think it pretty regularly. I think, I'm thinking that person, Damiana and Tulsi and chamomile. And then sometimes the patient will ask me why, and I can rationalize it, right? But I could have also have said, I don't know, rose and oats and something, and wood betony. So I think a lot of it is just based on experience, and that comes forth in the form of intuition.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. And that's one thing I love about herbal medicine in this country is that there's such a variety of approaches. There's different ways, but you know what? They all work. Well, actually, I shouldn't say they all work. Some don't, but the ones that have lasted through time, you give 3 drops of an herb to someone and everything shifts. How is that possible from a physiological model? Or, you pick an herb out of a bucket of herbs that have one shared physiological action, and bingo, that was the right one. So, it's amazing to see how, that I think more or less the plants just work. They just work. And, I think the idea though of backing up your intuition with experience and it's often, I know for me, the intuition then leads me down a rabbit hole of study of wanting to understand, well, why did that pop in my head and why did it work so well? And so, the learning can work both ways.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to give very large doses, I have to say. Like for me, more of the model I'm going to give is going to be giving, dropperfuls, especially for an acute disorder. The problem is, it's not even the problem. Placebo value is a real thing, whether it's medicine or herbs. And I think what herbalists often offer, it's a little different. So what medical people offer is kind of an authoritarian convincibility. And that could be very powerful, right? Sometimes we don't want that. We want a human being who's going to feel with us. But I think a lot of people, they like that. Here's what I think is good for you. And it's said very, strongly, and the person has a lot of experience. And that's going to be a part of people's process, getting better. And I think the same with herbs. So when you think, I have a really good feeling about rose for you, there's no question that person, especially if it's for anxiety, because you're offering something to counter anxiety with your words and your body actions as well. Because people will often say, this herb was amazing, and they'll say it for something I've never heard of that herb being used for. And here they are saying it's good for them. And so I'm not going to deny them their experience, but it might not be something I use again. I'm not sure what the circumstances were.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we as herbalists, we also have we have our tried and true buddies, our friends, plants that just are reliable for us. What are yours? What are kind of your, always have in your back pocket, ones that you tend to use a lot for a lot of different things?
That's the kind of, I use a lot of, because so I work in a free clinic, and in the free clinic, anxiety is the number one health issue. So not so much my back pocket, but the back pocket of the free clinic.
Sure.
There's probably about, I can name them to be like Damiana, Rose, Tulsi, Hops, Valerian, help me out here, Ashley, wood betony these days. So one thing I want to change this a little bit up. So recently, I've been finding myself relying on the same herbs too much, right? I feel like what you're saying is, I've used the same herbs very regularly, maybe about 30, 35 herbs, really show up a lot. Whether it's for Lyme disease, would be one set of herbs, or anxiety, or hemorrhoids. And so what I did is I started making a database for myself that I can use. It's a little bit harder with an online consultation, so that I try new things with people. Because I have, in my downstairs here and in the clinic, I probably have about 350 different herbal medicines, more than that. And I feel bad. I feel like you talk about being friends. I put them in a jar years ago, and they are just soaking and getting none of the love of going in a person's digestive tract. So, I'm going to try to get it online. It'll be free, and I'm trying to get it online by April. But it'll be an herbal database of my experience and then other people's. It's just me writing it at this point. I have a tech friend who's helping me because I'm just terrible with that stuff. But really the reason I did it is because, like every year or two, like this has been my wood betony year, for instance, right? And I've been using a lot of it. And then you have to like take into account, like, am I seeing changes? And that's a hard thing to evaluate, right? Because so much is involved. Like if you're working with someone with anxiety and they come to you regularly, something's working, but what is working, right? Is it the consultation? Is it they get out of their house to come and see me? Have they been motivated to maybe change their food habits during the course of this? So frankly, a lot like Lyme disease is an intermittent disease, right? So Lyme is very common around Ithaca, New York, and people will get it and they'll do something and think it's amazing, but later it doesn't work. But it's not that, it could have just gone into remission, as so many health issues can, especially autoimmune stuff, and then Borrelia bacteria.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I love that you're doing that. That's such a smart way of keeping track of these things, because it's so easy. You just sort of go on to the next client, and then when they come back, you check in. But to keep an actual rolling database of all of those experiences. And I love too, like the friends that are pushed to the back of the closet. It's true how we need to bring them back out and say, how do I utilize this medicine that was so generous to give itself to me and allow me to gather it? How do I make sure it's not composted in vain?
Right. And especially all that wheat that was gathered to make the alcohol for the tincture. And
yes.
Also, it just feels, we just know so many herbs, and it just feels. It just feels stingy. I don't know what it feels like. I need to expand. Not a lot though, because if I just start throwing lots of different stuff, then that's just sloppy herbal medicine, right? Yeah. So for instance, I give a lot of echinacea, and at times I've used less. Right now, in fact, I use a little bit less, and then see what the results are. Again, I saw echinacea. So back pocket herb, front pocket herb, backpack, camelback, echinacea, because it stimulates our own immunity. And generally doesn't cause autoimmune conditions. So occasionally it does, it gives flares.
Yeah. One herb I want to talk about before we end here is yarrow, because yarrow is I would say that's probably one of my back pocket herbs. I use it with my kids all the time for cuts and scrapes, for fevers. So it's definitely like one of my mainstays. And it's the plant that's on the logo with a little dragonfly on it.
Wow, well done. Well done.
You taught me well.
Go to waste.
So do you use yarrow, and how do you use yarrow?
So I use a lot of yarrow. So yarrow has one advantage that almost no other plant has, and that is its commonality, right? So I don't have to bring yarrow very often, because it doesn't grow in the desert. So I've traveled a lot in the States, and you can find it. So it's native to this part of the world, but it's also so native plants are often more problematic to gather than non-natives, because it's easier to disturb their habitat. But yarrow grows in disturbed habitats very frequently. So I can, I'll be at the rainbow gathering in Colorado. And even if we're like 8,000 feet, there'll be yarrow probably growing there. So I don't think it's the strongest herb for what it does, but it's a common herb for what it does. And so for me, that's one of its main attributes. And it has a pretty long flowering period. Even though the leaves are effective, it's just easier to find that when it's in flower. It grows in disturbed habitats. So you have this whole like wildcrafting aspect to it, which really gives it a lot of use for me. I'm probably a better word than that, but it means I'm going to use it more.
Yeah.
Because I can gather it without harming the environment. Next, it's just like miscible. Miscible meaning the constituents come out in almost any menstruum. It's like miscible in water. It's miscible in vinegar. It's miscible in honey. It's miscible in alcohol. So it's just, so you can put it into many different menstruums, many different fluids, and it'll come out. The one thing though about yarrow is it doesn't keep that well. So even if I gather it and dry it really well, a couple of years later, you just have to get rid of it. So something like peppermint, you could have 10-year-old peppermint or 20-year-old chaparral, and they're still potent. You can smell them, you can taste them, you can feel them in your body. Where yarrow, the aromatics dissipate much quicker. So we use it a lot for soaks. One of the main things. So I mentioned that one of the most common thing are foot injuries, foot sores. And so we just make big fat, we got lots of yarrow, get ourselves, a 2.5, 3 gallon pot, fill it with yarrow, Cook it. It's not the most, it's not probably again, aromatizes, gets rid of a lot of the stuff pretty quickly, but we have it ready to go. And so when somebody comes in with a cut in their foot, we could just heat that up. And then we there's a couple different ways that we soak the foot, often basins with a plastic bag around them to try to prevent infection from spreading. So use yarrow that way a lot. I don't find it as strong as a hemostat as other people have said. So I don't find that it stopped really. So this is a little bit off course, and I try to wind up here. But people often talk about using yarrow for stopping bleeding. Personally, I find pressure just works. And most of the people I work with find the same. So when you put yarrow, if somebody has a cut and you put yarrow and then you do this and hold it on, you apply the pressure itself causes those capillaries to go into a tortuous activity and close off. And actually it could be a bit of a problem because if you introduce plants into a deep wound, the wound can't heal until it extrudes the plant again. But I think of it as an antimicrobial. I use yarrow as an anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antiviral. I use it for respiratory viruses, bacterial infections, kind of redundant statements right there. If I had a piece, I actually have a workup, my own sheet on yarrow. It's almost the longest one I have because it's just so effective. So I agree. And also it's very pretty.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It's one of my favorites. I often dry it and then I don't take it down or use it because I just like the way it looks hanging throughout my house.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You open up the door and there's some yarrow hanging down until the strings get loose, and then all of a sudden you just have yarrow falling on your shoulder.
Exactly. Yeah. Then it's time to go. Oh, well, thank you so much, Seven Song. This has been such a delightful talk. And, as everyone, as we mentioned before, there's a lot of free resources on Seven Song's website. So I'll put a link to your website and to your school so folks can find you. Do you have any, are you traveling to teach at any conferences? Do you have any upcoming courses or anything that you want to plug and let folks know of places they can find you?
So I'm not traveling very much at all these days. I don't know if people have heard there's like a virus or something.
What?
So, no, I've heard maybe the virus. I think there was a newspaper article like Page 7 or something. No, of course, there's an active virus, COVID, of course, and Omicron currently, just a variation. I am not downplaying COVID in any way at all. I'm being a little sarcastic here for people who are thinking that I'm somehow don't believe in COVID. I absolutely believe in COVID. I work in a free clinic and we work with a lot of people.
You'll get to know this humor once you spend more time with him. It is charming and lovely. So go on, carry on.
People often say much nastier words than charming and lovely, rough, cynical, other words, and much worse words. But I run an herb school, the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine. I'm in Ithaca, New York. All my classes this year are in person. I am taking next year off. In 2023, I turned 65 years old, and I'm going to give myself the gift of taking a year off from teaching. It's been 28 years. I have taken some other years off, and I'm actually going to be coming close by. So the main place I want to visit during my year off is the Black Hills of South Dakota.
Oh, cool. You'll be in my neck of the woods.
No, I will be. So I'll when that happens, but I've always wanted to spend like a couple of weeks there by myself. I'm going to also visit like Linda Black Elk and meet some people out there and just do botanizing. I can't wait because there's a lot of endemics. Often when I go out to look at plants, it's not to make medicine. It's just to look at plants and photograph them. So anyway, I run an herb school. I put up terrible limericks on my Facebook and Instagram post page these days. So if you write bad poetry and want to find another bad poet, I might be good for that as well. And if you write great poetry and want to read bad poetry, you can try that as well. I fall into limerick mode for plants. So I tried a couple of different ways, and then limericks would just fit. So, there was a plant named this or whatever.
Yeah, they've been great. So I'll include a link to your Instagram and Facebook accounts too, so folks can laugh along with us.
I'll stop. And just, I just want to suggest studying herbal medicine is amazing. It's been, so I talked a little bit about how I got started, but one thing I didn't say is why did I stay in it? And one of the main reasons I've stayed in herbal medicine is the community. I find it like inquiring. I find it people who want to be of service. I find people are often open-minded. So of course there's exceptions to this, and I have my own exceptions to this in my own body and mind. But in general, I have found it a very good community of people to spend most of my life with. So I'm just suggesting, that's a whole other part of herbal medicine. Going to herbal conferences, it's a little overwhelming at times with all the people. So that aside, often just people want to talk and about interesting things, and food's often good, which matters, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's it. I'll stop.
That's great. It's such a good point, though. The community is such a big part of, I think, why so many of us, we get sucked in because of the plants and they're magnificent, and then we stay because of the people. So,
it's a little bit true.
So thank you so much for all of your time and for sharing your experience. And of course, I just love spending time around you. So thank you for this time. And let me know when you drive through the Midwest, and maybe you can stop by for some tea.
I would love to. All right, Ashley.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.